Before we get started, I want to throw at all of you guys a couple of the questions you commonly see online about peaking for shows. Albumin plasma expanders intravenously while carbing up.
No.
Can't say no.
We don't even need the podcast. That's the secret right there.
Injectable Lasix the night before the competition or the morning of the competition.
No.
Trenbolone or testosterone suspension before prejudging to get into the competition mindset.
No.
No.
Insulin and blueberry pancakes before prejudging.
It sounds fun. Like it seems like good just from a enjoyment standpoint, but I'm sorry, no.
Welcome to the Anabolic Roundtable, episode 10. Believe it or not, we've survived 10 episodes of this crazy podcast talking about performance-enhancing drugs in the context of bodybuilding. We're joined with the one and only IFBB Pro, John Jewett, and Dr. Dean St. Mart, and the guy that everybody calls when they can't figure it out, Kurt Havens, and myself. We're going to talk about dialing shit in for contest, right? Contest prep, the peak week process. I'm very rusty. I haven't done any peak weeks for anybody, any clients for 5 years because I'm a retired contest prep coach. So I got the three leading experts in the business to kind of fill in the blanks for me. Before we get started, I want to know how the Arnold Classic was real briefly because I didn't go. I canceled my flight. So Kurt, John, please fill me and Dean in about your Arnold Classic experience because I felt like I'm missing out.
Arnold Classic was a miss. Well, thanks for having me back for one. But the Arnold Classic is always, I think it probably sets the bar for an expo. Maybe comparatively to FIBO. FIBO's a little different. It's more like a trade show though. But at least I was at the animal booth the entire weekend. So that was just nonstop flooded with people. They brought the cage back last year, which was a good call for animal because I think it really highlights the entire Arnold Expo. Like they won #1 booth as well. But man, the lifts in the cage were just mind blowing. There was a kid from New Zealand, 22 years old, deadlifted at like 1,075 and went for like 1,100, like the Thor Bjorgesson, right? Like the world's strongest man. He's pulling the same as this guy, which is just demoralizing. But there's like two other guys pull like 900 pounds in the cage and guy bench like 700 pounds raw, right? That's just crazy lifts you see. And these people go all out just for that event. But all the fan interactions and everything were pretty awesome. So it was a really good time. Exhausting though, for sure.
3 days, right?
Yeah, three days. And Kurt, did you go to the actual show?
I did. Yeah, it was great. I think the Arnold is a better overall production than the Olympia. The stage is better to see. I think the lighting is better. The crowd, the scene, everything about the Arnold, I enjoy more than the Olympia. And it was great to see. Men's Open. I think it was pretty apparent who was going to win as soon as they came out on stage. Right.
Yeah, I felt like Derek looked like Jay Cutler in 2009, but Jay Cutler in 2009 was working with Hani Rambot, and Derek switched to Chris Aceto. I found it very funny that they had a little bit of a similar look, like almost reddish, but like hard dense and feathered all around. I thought it was very interesting, but I wasn't there. Right? I watched the live stream. So how was the show for you guys?
It's good.
I didn't go to the show.
Oh.
Man, Saturday, like after like our expo, Renee and I were in bed, just like done. We just like couldn't even move. Our legs were so tired. We're like, I want to watch the live stream though.
Yeah.
So, but I agree. Like Derek came out and was like, seems pretty clear. And I'm always rooting for the short guy to give myself hope and encouragement. So,
aren't you a little bit taller than Derek though?
I guess relative to like Samson and Andrew Jack, I guess not as much, but I am maybe like an inch or two taller than Derek.
Yeah,
what
I like Derek
now,
because
John?
he has crazy lats.
What do you weigh now, John?
I was 260 this morning.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, it's the biggest you've ever been, right?
I've been like my heaviest ever was 262. That was 2 years ago, but again, this was like a very different composition. So took me, I eventually died down to 218, in other words. So it's like, there's quite a bit of fat on me.
But that was when you were still doing 212, or that was when you started doing open shows?
That was my last 212 show. Yeah, that off season was a long one, and I got up pretty heavy ended up coming back down to like, around 217, 218, I was ready. So last off season, most muscular ever, right? And only the heaviest I got up to was like 253. So it's like the scale weight. Hey, sometimes you got to keep composition in mind.
Yeah, I agree. I'm down to like 235. I'm trying to keep it cleaner this time because I was 265 a couple months ago, and it was not pretty. It was not good.
You can see in your face came down.
Yeah,
face gains.
My face was like this. It was good though. It was very strong, so it was very enjoyable. But I was almost like looking like a powerlifter by the end of my off season. Not too pretty. Dean, how was your trip to Disneyland?
Amazing. Although I don't know what it is. As you get older, you tend to get more dizzy with rides. I don't know what happens with our balance or whatever, but man, we went on Space Mountain I think 4 times in a row, me and my 6-year-old. And by the end of it, he wanted to go on it again, and I had to go to my wife. You need to go on it with him because I'm reaching the point of I'm starting to see stars. But yeah, very enjoyable. The absolute magic when we went over to the Disneyland Studio part, the other park, where you've got like the Avengers campus. So you got to meet like Spider-Man, Captain America. Just seeing their faces, seeing these superheroes was magic. So as people can see, I'm not in my office today. I'm over in SN Hub. So we've got a little work soundproof pod that I'm inside. So if the camera's a little bit different than the mic, we can blame being away from home on it.
We'll clean it up in post-production. Don't worry. All right, guys. So today we're going to discuss peaking for contests. That's why we wanted to have John back because, well, his last Olympia showing was absolutely phenomenal. One of the most conditioned and the best peaked guy on stage. Trust me, I was there, front row, and I can confirm this. But before we get started, I want to throw at all of you guys a couple of the questions you commonly see online about peaking for shows, which is, of course, insane protocols. So let's get that out of the way first. And a simple yes and no will do. And if there's a yes, we can address it a little bit later on. And if it's a no, we're just going to glance over it. Let's start with a couple of control questions. Are we all bald?
Well, I'm getting there.
You're getting there, right? Yeah, you did some plugs. This is self-induced. I just fucking hate hair. Card, Dean?
I mean, mine was self-induced too. I like drugs.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably self-induced as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Genetic proclivity as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, genetics
Dean,
on my
Dean's
mother's
hung
side.
on for dear life with the plugs from Turkey.
Yeah. So we'll say this is 8 weeks since the procedure, so it's starting to sprout out, which has been interesting.
Cool. All right, second control question. Is this the anabolic roundtable?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, good. Dean, confirm?
It is,
Or deny?
yep.
Okay.
Nope.
Oh shit, wrong podcast.
Shit. What is this? What podcast is this?
Anabolic what?
All right, first real question. Injectable adenosine monophosphate on the morning of the competition before prejudging?
No.
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 No? Damn. Albumin plasma expanders intravenously while carbing up?
No.
Can't say no.
Just going
That's
what
the secret.
I found.
We don't even need a podcast. That's the secret right there.
Yeah. Just going what I found online, man. Injectable Lasix the night before the competition or the morning of the competition?
No.
No.
Probably not.
What about Mercury-Based Diuretics the night before the competition?
No.
I go no.
It has been done, allegedly. 200 to 300 milligrams Anadrol daily while carbing up.
Wow, that'd be
It's been
immense,
done.
but I still go with a no.
I'm going with a no, but it's been done.
It's been done,
no.
right?
I've played with things like around that, but I can speak to that. So
Okay, so we'll address it a little bit later on if that's a good or
Risky at
valid
best.
or a risky endeavor to try. Trenbolone or testosterone suspension before prejudging to get into the competition mindset.
No.
no.
The testosterone to me is risky. Who knows what you look like?
I've seen it
And Tren
injected
suspension,
right
you're trying to jump
right
off
in
a
front of
roof.
me at the World Championships, which is a drug tested show. Like, what are you taking? Yeah, testosterone suspension to get my my mindset right for prejudging.
Yeah, your mindset right.
He did win
Yeah.
though. He
Along
did
with
win.
100 milligrams of Halo.
Yeah.
Just getting my brain straight.
Exactly. Growth hormone loading. Let's say 10 IUs, 36 IUs, 1 to 2 days before the competition.
It's risky. Water retention.
No.
I would say no.
No.
No, damn. Injectable glucagon on the morning of the competition.
That could work. I've seen it work.
Yep.
I would say no, though, still.
It's probably no, but I've seen it work.
Let's see. Fat loading the day before the competition. Now we're going to a little bit more PG-13
Sometimes.
topics.
Depends on the person.
Burger and diazide, 5 guys in a diazide. Yeah.
No, like a legitimate fat load
I've
with
seen it.
maybe some
I've used it
walnuts or
before.
almonds, avocado,
I've used
that
it
kind
before,
of stuff.
depending on where water is and stuff.
I would say that they're bringing back fats, but not to a load.
Yeah,
but
that's-
I think there's a fat loading application that to be discussed.
Yeah.
But in general, I'd say no.
Yeah, not loading. Correct. It's in the case of lack of fluid. Sometimes you have to replace the calories.
Dean, what do you think?
Normally it's done earlier in the week as opposed to the day before
Yeah.
the show.
Okay.
Just for the pure fact we can touch on it later, but just digestion and what could happen with constipation. You know, wake up
Yeah.
on show day being constipated.
Talking about constipation, what about colonics or hydrotherapy on the morning of the competition to clean out? I'm just going through fucking what the internet says, man.
No, but I guess you could utilize that if you had to make weight for a class, not the morning of a show, but say I'd weigh in Friday evening. I definitely wouldn't do the colonic Friday morning, but you could do it earlier in the week to try and clean out some of the stuff that's there. I think we hold about 3 kilos of waste in our colon, so it's about 5-6 pounds you could theoretically flush out.
It could probably in this individual, you're probably a lot of people already pull veggies out. And so like, I notice people it's like, man, I haven't gone to the bathroom. It's like, well, there's not a lot left to go because of the food sources they're using. But I have used like a kind of a stair-step approach to getting someone to have a BM from like mild and slowly moving up to using like suppositories, and usually by the suppositories I can make something happen, but I've never had to go on to the like doing a colonic.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
pretty extreme.
Even bumping up
Yeah.
magnesium beforehand can help.
Yeah, magnesium and TATCA and just help with intestinal mobility helps quite a bit. But yeah, if you're mad constipated and you need to make weight, then coffee colonics actually go quite a long way, especially if you're some weird hotel room where you know you've just been traveling for a day, and then it might help. Okay, but it's a no for most guys. Mifepristone or misoprostol or another kind of prostaglandin agonist to clean out the day before the competition. No. It's basically the morning after pill.
No.
Just going by what the internet says that all the pros are doing, man.
I know there was an interesting protocol from a certain coach years ago surrounding like PGC1 alpha for similar benefits of flushing out the bowels, but again, like the colonic or anything like that, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Insulin and blueberry pancakes before prejudging.
It sounds fun. Like it seems like a good idea just from a enjoyment standpoint, but I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, no.
Fuck, man. Okay, what about insulin and pumpkin pie filling before prejudging?
know that protocol. So
yeah, okay, good. Yeah,
no.
Damn. Okay, saunas for weight cuts to make weight for classic or 212.
I don't go that far, but I know plenty of guys that have. So,
and the last one, clear fingernail polish before applying the tan.
I did this for Olympia.
Clear.
And it's still on my toenails. Yeah.
Okay.
Clear nail polish for your fingers and feet. It's life-saving. Especially if you're getting tanned with Pro-Tan and it stains right through your nails for months.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. I used to do it all the time when I was applying tan backstage because at the World Championships, you didn't have spray. There's no spray tanning, no Jantan, no Pro-Tan. Most of the guys use Dream Tan, but that makes you look horrible and it fills in all the detail. So I would just apply Pro-Tan base coat for 17 athletes the whole day in between peaking them. And then your fingernails are, of course, the first time you do it, are messed up for months. So yeah, you go with the clear, you do a pedicure and then you go with the clear fingernail polish. And then actually you're good looking afterwards. Once, besides the little bit of wrinkle stuff that you get. So yeah, that's pretty much a must if you apply tan, either for yourself or for clients. So that's the quick shit list that I wanted to get out of the way, because if you go online or some of the people who are not in the know, they claim to know all kinds of weird drug protocols involved in peaking for contests. And we got an overwhelming amount of no's. So let's get into the real stuff. What is being done? Now, obviously, it's a step-by-step process to get into, absolutely phenomenal contest shape and peaking for a show. So maybe we can start with how to get extra dicey first, because when you're extra diced, super shredded, you don't need to do all the crazy stuff that people think that the pros are doing. Let's start with Dean, because Dean did like 8 shows back to back and he kept improving. So Dean, spill the beans.
I think last year was just an N equals 1, I guess, because like we discussed several times, not once did my diet change, not once did I have to do extra cardio. The drug setup never really changed. It was just, I can't personally explain how week to week I was losing body fat based on what I was eating and doing, but I guess years of dieting, your body just has that innate ability to go back to a low set point. So I guess the main piece of advice is doing repeated diets until you get to that desired body fat level. Like if you're an amateur and you're aiming for your first 1 to 2 shows, unless you want to end up looking like a skeleton, it's highly unlikely you're getting on stage with straight glutes. Unless you really want to diet for a long, long period of time, where you're giving yourself sufficient diet breaks to reset and maintenance and then go again. You could be looking at maybe dieting for the best part of 1.5 years to give yourself sufficient time to get to a new set point, hold it with maintenance, go down another little touch. So last year was probably the culmination of 10 years of doing diets like that. And I can say from personal experience, it took until my 3rd competitive season in terms of dieting to get down to absolutely walnut glutes. And that again there's nothing magically changed other than getting to a new set point, going into an off season after competing, and then going back into a dieting phase. So time is probably the very top when it comes to getting into absolutely gnarly condition. And then I guess some of it is genetics. You could be unfortunate in terms of skin genetics, and like we've all joked about, thicker collagen, so you don't end up with that sort of thinness to the muscle or to the look of the physique. You could have different distribution of alpha receptors throughout your body, so you could have issues getting your glutes in, your quads, your lower back. And that can just take time of repeated dieting and then using alpha receptor blockers like yohimbine or royalcine or alpha-yohimbine to help you release the fatty acids out of those cells to mobilize them. But I guess with even the other thing about time is not doing crazy things of dropping to 600, 700 calories, thinking that a huge deficit is going to yield you huge fat loss. Because the only thing that will suffer then in that case is your training intensity, and then you'll start losing muscle mass, and then your appetite starts increasing, and then you're sort of left trying to figure out, how do I fix this mess? So having even the patience to slowly manipulate the diet over time or manipulate output from cardio just reiterates the point of patience.
You think a lot of guys don't have patience nowadays because they want to stay full, when in reality the first couple of diets that you need to go through there, you need to go a little bit flatter to really get shredded, because you don't have that muscle maturity and density yet, and maybe not the financial means to go on a heavy cycle, or your body can't even tolerate it to stay full. Because you have a lot of pros now, they look insanely full the entire contest prep through. And then maybe the guys that are in the beginning of their contest prep career, they think that they need to stay full and large and in charge, but in reality, they need to suffer a little bit more and get really down to get all that fat off. I see that more often than not nowadays, where the guys just don't want to get, to a point where they're flat for weeks on end, when that used to be the norm.
Yeah. The other thing about patience is you'll find with newer athletes, asking questions about refeeds. When am I getting a refeed? Oh, I'm feeling a little flat. When am I getting a refeed? I think I need more carbs. Instead of just seeing out the process that, yeah, there's some days where it's going to absolutely suck and you're going to be flat and it's going to be difficult to get a pump no matter how hydrated or how balanced your sodium potassium is. You're going to be fatigued depending on your sleep if that's not in a good position. And it's really just down to string a load of those sucky days together before you get to a point where your physique probably warrants then a refeed, or your training performance warrants a refeed. And even then, it's probably a refeed where you're going back to maintenance calories from increased carbs, where you're not breaking out into like an all-day splurge of whatever fits in your mouth and having a full-on like
skip load
cheat
for
day.
8 hours.
Yeah, skip load.
It does work though if you have
it
some
does
experience,
work.
but for the beginners, it's
absolutely works. But then, you know, you've got beginners looking at a protocol like that and thinking that they can eat boxes of cereal, you know, eat cookies all day. It's really the physique dependent, metabolism dependent. Because the worst thing you could do is have a high refeed day like that, where you completely overspill and you end up creating new fat cells. And the whole point was to just top up glycogen so that for the next 4 to 5 days of training, you have sufficient glycogen to, you know, produce maximal force to get you back to a good position of retaining the tissue whilst losing the body fat. So the whole refeed thing is another part to contest prep that you get questioned so many times of, you know, when should I refeed? How often should I refeed? And like last year's anomaly, if anything, Callum had to keep giving me high days every 4 to 5 days because the physique just kept quickly flattening out with how well my body was utilizing fatty acids for energy. And that was all down to training intensity stayed absolutely 100% on par to off season. So it really comes down to the patience. But again, yeah, it shows the value of off season and being as meticulous with your eating and everything else in your off season versus contest prep.
all right, John.
Yeah, I don't want to just bang the gong that Ding just rung, but with a lot of this it is a time component. But I would say what's going to set up your next prep is what you do the moments after your last show. And I truly like the first week after someone's last competition can already set up like taking months off their off season to already then having an extended prep to pull off the fat. And I see guys just like that's where I've changed, at least, that being able to manage myself better post show by the end of this 8-week phase of like lower gear and starting to set up an off season. I'm at my leanest point that I'm able to also remove any type of maladaptations from prep. And that starts off season. So I'm very, very lean, a long runway to make progress in. And all those, what Dean just brought up was like routine. All those routine and habits that were built in prep, when you feel like you're a machine and you're just on it, you carry those into off season and post show, and those just never drop off to where you don't then get the inconsistencies to where this week, oh man, I jumped up 3 pounds and I get a little more body fat, and all those weeks start accruing to where your off season slowly slips away from you. So getting into a good position just to even start your prep begins with what you do right after your last show. And with that being said, then once you're into this prep situation, I like reverse engineer your timeline. To me, it's a math equation, because why do people not get in shape? That's the question I would ask, right? And they run out of time. And then what do you do when you run out of time? Like Dean is saying, push down the gas. And so
All the
you
funky
do more
stuff
cardio.
we started off with.
Yeah, throw in the DMP, like up the Tren, bring in the halo, and all of a sudden you're just accruing more fatigue, and someone just still is not getting there or starts stalling, and then you dig harder and nothing's happening. So the right timeline is essential. So I always start like assessing, like look at your current off-season start point, look at your last prep start point and your end points, and do the math of how much weight you have to pull off and what that rate is reasonably able to be. And then from there, I think Dean brought up a great point around refeeds, is that when you first start prep, you're not going to be that depleted to where training performance is slipping to justify having increases of food. What I prefer in the beginning parts of prep is where you would have more fatigue buildup is still from like training, cardio, So I call it a de-output day. Think of it like a deload, but just removing the output side. So like once a week, I'll always have someone programmed in, like no cardio, very low steps, no training, to just drop off the fatigue. So, but in turn, we're also bringing someone closer to that maintenance calorie level by doing so. However, we're working on the output side over the input side to where we're not taking someone like Dee said, like way high in glycogen levels to where it takes days to get them back into like productive fat loss and losing time. Refeeds serve great purposes later on once you're lean and you're getting that glycogen depletion and training starts slipping. That's when the diet fatigue aspect really plays well to doing refeeds. But I think that's at least the fatigue management side along prep. And I struggle with that word fatigue management because a lot of people just don't even push hard enough to create enough fatigue for it to be a problem. So I think also, we always think about pulling off fat, but the bodybuilding is also about retaining tissue. And so like carrying your same type of training habits into prep, as long as those habits were of high quality, like you need to train hard in prep. And the guys that I see usually that were never that trained that hard to begin with are also the ones I see that usually don't get into great contest shape because that stimulus to hold on to tissue is just not that great. And when you're in a calorie deficit, that same training response doesn't produce the same type of anabolic response. So now you just see someone that's just getting a smaller version of themselves. So upholding hard training, but in doing so, then you need the fatigue management part of the equation there. And as you get closer to show with the right timeline, we can start adding in more refeeds, creating a smaller deficit, slowing down fat loss when you have less body fat to lose. And that slowly just kind of brings someone down into that next level of condition where we can see them start landing the plane before peak week. And you're now living at like a maintenance calorie level and you start removing some extra fatigue and start getting even harder because most of that wasn't water weight from all your tests you're running. It's probably water weight from high cortisol and inflammation. And here we are. Peak week has arrived.
Yeah. So where do you think is the ideal ending point of an off season regarding how many weeks you're out from a competition? Is that 8 weeks out from a competition, 12 weeks, 16 weeks? Like what would be the maximum amount of body fat that you should be able to gain in the off season to make sure that you stay within striking distance of a productive contest prep?
Yeah, and like Dean, you're talking about like a body fat set point, and you do need to get someone back to a productive spot where their body fat level allows them to not have like sleep issues or food focus and optimized training. And that's just very different for everyone, right? Like we see that asshole we hate that is just ripped and has glute lines all year long and never gets that fat. While someone else, like a female, has to get to like 24% body fat to be back to like a hormonal normal state. And so they need some room to progress. And for that realistic for someone, that might having them get more than 24 weeks out of dieting. Like if you look at the natural sector, all those guys diet for a lot longer period of time. But that might require, like I've had some individuals where we need like a mini fat loss phase before we actually even enter prep. But I would say as a general rule of thumb, I try to not let anyone get past 24 weeks of dieting. If it's less, that's even better. But ideally, like, hey, this 16 to 20 week mark is kind of a good sweet spot, which a lot of people have done 16 to 20 week preps. That's pretty reasonable. But I would say, like, for yourself, if you're out there and you're listening, if you were better for your second show, likely you should tack on those weeks of you probably weren't a 16 week prep. You're really a 20 or 24 week prep. We see that a lot, especially with females doing multiple shows. Like finally they get better in condition. It's like, oh, well, look at that. That's actually a 28 week prep. But you say 28 week prep to someone, they're like, oh my gosh, like, no, I'm going with this other coach that's going to do a 16 week prep.
And then a DMP is included.
So it varies so much, right? Like last year when I jumped in Toronto early, like I got ready quick. Actually, it was only 8 weeks till I did that show. But I stayed lean. So just, it varies. But manage the timeline and just make sure when you're in your off season that I would say, hey, at least be able to have like 16 to 20 weeks of like productive time to add on body weight and not need to mini cut. So if you're in that state where you're needing to cut sooner, like probably just adding too much body fat on in that post show phase to begin with.
All right. Kurt.
I mean, just to add to what they said, I think one of the reasons why John is so successful is because he stays much leaner all year round now. And that's a big thing, right? Get to that body fat point that you can hold comfortably, where you can still make progress, but don't let yourself get fat, because you're just, Dean said previously, you're adding new fat cells. You're making your prep much more difficult. It's not advantageous to carry extra body fat. It's not going to make you a better bodybuilder just because the scale went up. There's no mechanism in the human body where excess amounts of food just magically becomes muscle tissue. That's not the stimulus for muscle growth. It's, and to define some things like refeed. I think people misunderstand what a refeed is. A refeed is not a burger and fries. A refeed is where we leverage carbohydrates appropriately, right? That's really the macro that has the most effect on your appearance and your performance. Not so much the dietary fat, especially when it comes to deep fried stuff. Like, I really try to keep my guys away from stuff like French fries and stuff like that. It just does nothing positive for you. Outside of some mental benefits, maybe, of having a cheat meal, that's not really a tool that we use, right? And that's why I typically have most guys are carb cycling. So we're kind of going through that process the whole time. And we can constantly move the food up and down. And like Dean saw, as you get deeper into prep, for most guys, when they're getting really close to being ready, their metabolism starts to run away, right? Their body fat will just continually drop really quickly at the end. And I've had guys where I have to refeed 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row. Some of the pros like John that have a ton of muscle mass, that stay pretty lean, their metabolism is wild at the end. You get guys, eating a ton of food going into a show. But a lot of that success is set up in the off season. And not to steal a term from AJ, but I prefer the term progress season versus off season, because you're never really off, right? That same training and mentality and dieting and all that stuff is year round. It's just the quantity of things is different, right? There's probably less cardio, obviously less dieting, but the food is roughly the same, right? John, you probably eat the same stuff year round, just the different quantity. You're not all of a sudden going from pizza to chicken and rice, right? It's the same measured stuff day in and day out. I've ate the same breakfast for 30 something years. It just, the amount of it just differs depending on what your goal is. Yeah. And it's interesting because you don't see the same level of conditioning nowadays, probably because the bodybuilding community has grown, right? So there's some is a genetic component, right? Not everyone can get that lean to be a competitive bodybuilder. And as the population in bodybuilding gets larger and larger, it attracts more, let's say, average people that, might not be able to have that look. Like, not every human can look like John Jewett. I hate to say that, but he was born different than most people, right? Just like any other athlete in any professional sport, there is a huge genetic component to it. And a lot of it's mental. Like, your brain can handle things that most guys would break, halfway through. You see that often. Right. And going back to the point of a diet, like you both said, just to read it, the point of a diet is to maintain intensity in training, to maintain muscle mass, and then to lose fat. If you've lost the first two and you're just losing fat, you're probably losing muscle with it as well, right? If your fatigue level is so high that you're not sleeping, like you're just burned out from too many drugs and stuff, your progress can come to a halt.
Yeah,
like a lot of times you can get leaner by using less drugs and sleeping at night than you would using a gram of Tren and being wide awake. You're probably not going to look any better doing that.
No. If anything, you're going to look soft and watery. You've seen it happen quite a bit.
Super stressed out.
Like, what I notice when people make the most progress is when they eat exactly the same food during the off season, aka progress season and contest prep. It just, the amounts are different. So you might have a little bit more protein and less carbohydrates during a cutting phase. Whereas in the off season, progress season, it's reversed, because the more carbohydrates you eat, you have a little bit of a protein sparing effect. So you can eat less protein and more carbohydrates, maybe a little bit more fat if your metabolism is really ramped up. And then refeeds are pretty much the same as what you eat during the week, just more of that as well. And then, of course, once in a while, there might be a cheat meal incorporated, but there's a difference between going out for sushi and going out for pizzas, like a 4 or 5 cheese pizza, right? The composition of the meals are quite different, and everybody gets strung up like, I need a cheat meal to refeed and fill out, and I'm going to go with a pizza and Ben & Jerry's, but that's probably the wrong approach. So I would send most of my guys just for sushi, because that seems to be pretty similar to what you had during your week anyway. It's rice and fish. Okay, the rice has a little bit of sugar in it, some vinegar, but it's way better for you as a cheat meal than what most people go with. So I think that the food selection throughout the entire year really contributes to how you end up looking like. And then I think what the hardest part is for myself and many people out there is that when they go on holiday, that the diet kind of falls apart because you're not close to your kitchen. There's not food that you usually have. I just give up on a holiday. I've tried it for 10 years, and when I go on holiday, I just eat whatever. But then, that sets me back weeks to months sometimes. That's why most guys just don't travel unless it's for business.
Yeah, it's funny because we came back from the Arnold. Renee and I were like, we're never leaving till I prep again. It's like that was it. Like, it's so challenged out there. Like, pulled 3 pounds down. Like, man, if I wasn't adding more and more food in, it was going to be a problem. But the variability makes a challenge for someone in the off season. Which, like you, Steve. Like, we went to Banff for vacation in the off season, which is like non-bodybuilding trip, right? Just true vacation. But still, like, we do like a dinner a night, but take all my food, and I'm watching the scale every day to try to account for different activity levels. But if you're traveling a lot as a bodybuilder, man, it makes it really hard to string together progress.
Yeah, especially as you get bigger, because your body's so more dependent on the food intake, and people don't understand how much food you need to eat just to sustain your weight and keep that activity level going. And then if you go away from home, even one flight, you're missing meals. And your physique kind of falls apart. So that's why you see most IFBB pros, they barely travel when they're successful. Like I don't see Derek go on holiday. I don't see Samson go on holiday. I don't see Nick Walker go on holiday. Most of the successful guys at the pro level, it's minimal holidays. And normal people, myself included, I'd like to go out sometimes. And that's where the bodybuilding takes a setback and makes, peaking into a contest very, very difficult, because you have just days where you just fuck off, basically, and it doesn't contribute to the bigger picture.
Yeah, I've gotten such like great speaking opportunities to go like international, and I just have to turn them down. It's like at this time, like, man, I have to prioritize bodybuilding. But I want to bring up something that Kurt like just kind of briefly mentioned, is that the prioritization around your routine and stress, and also sleep. So I see a lot of people go into a prep with an expectation they're going to carry the same amount of workload that they could. And this was my mistake in the past, because I was, I was working 9 to 5 at a hospital. I was trying to coach clients on the side. Like, the moment I got up, I was doing cardio in the evening. And then, like, by the time my head hit the pillow, like, I never had downtime. Right. And those were some of the hardest preps that were like mentally, physically really exhausting. And also sleep could suffer too, because like, well, I got to do cardio, I got to get up even earlier, and sleep segment got even decreased. And we see like in look at sleep deprivation. I don't mean like missing a whole day of sleep, just even by an hour, you see people in a calorie deficit that will lose less body fat and lose more muscle mass. So
and hunger's up too.
And it's a snowball, right? Hunger's up too. You're more fatigued. Now training performance suffers too. And so sleep is your number one recovery tool, but it nearly could be its own fat loss agent in a sense, if you want to state it that way. And same goes for off season, prioritizing it, as you can easily see less fat accrual and more muscle gain with prioritizing sleep and sleep quality. So I know we have all these awesome like wearable devices and trying to pick apart deep sleep and REM sleep. And I'm trying to do the same to improve that. So especially in prep, people cranking their gear sky high and all the sympathetic drive from that, and sleep quality diminishes. It's likely not worth it if you're diminishing that much to where you're now having partitioning towards less muscle retention and more fat retention too. Like in this Olympia prep, I brought back in Trenbolone for a week. I was like, good Lord, forget it. Like, my sleep went to shit. I was like, this is miserable. Forget it. And it just wasn't quite required for me at that point. So I think prioritizing sleep, and then also making yourself available for your prep. It has to take a priority. So, if you have you should be doing this during a season of work where you're able to execute a prep and have downtime, because some relaxation time at the end of the night to wind down and have that good sleep as well. and relaxation time during the day is what sleep is tonight. So it can just drop off stress and that total allosteric load of stress. If you can free up some of that space, that's more space for like your training to occur and adaptations to occur. So if by the end of the day you filled up your stress bucket, it's overflowing, right? You have very little room for a training stress on top to create adaptation. So if everything we can do on prep to like free up and let some water out of the stress bucket to allow training to occur could really help you in retaining tissue across your prep.
Yeah. And if you're that guy who's already waking up 3 or 4 times a night to pee before you go into prep, probably not a wise idea to go into prep until you figure out what's wrong with your sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's just going to get worse.
So does that mean that if you want to have a little bit more restful day, that it's going to be very hard to combine hardcore bodybuilding into a contest prep with a regular job? Because that's why I remember coaching people with a regular job, and they had a very hard time towards the end doing the contest because they had to be on their feet or do work for 8 hours a day. Whereas the guys that are self-employed, they're coaches, they're personal trainers, whatever, they seem to have it a little bit easier because they can take naps when they want to. They can take a break when they want to. They don't succumb to the stress of being employed. And that seems to be a big difference between a successful prep and a not so successful prep. And the guys that are going to regular jobs are usually also, stimmed to the max to keep productivity going.
Man, shift workers were the hardest people to prep.
Yeah.
I don't know, Kurt, if you all have a prep shift workers. Have you ever done shift work yourself? But yeah, that's right, Dean. Yeah, so you work at the plant, right?
Yeah, I was 8 years on shift pretty much, and I done my preps during that. But I'm like N=1 because we were lucky that we had a gym on site in the facility, so you could go and do your cardio before you started your shift at the gym. So you just turn up to work early, get a shower, go to your desk, and then at lunchtime go and train on the hour instead of eating in the canteen, especially on night shift. So I was lucky that you could just build your work day around that routine. Whether you were off work, on day shift, on night shift, you just swapped around the times by 12 hours. But for anyone else who doesn't have access to a gym, yeah, man, I would have liked to have thought how it would be to, even for night shift, get up in the afternoon, like 3 p.m. in the afternoon to do cardio, and then make a decision after your cardio. Do you eat and then try and train before like a 7 p.m. shift, or do you go to work and then after work, when you're pretty much almost ready to fall asleep, do you drive to the gym and try and train? Because I done that a couple of times where I finished work 7 a.m., didn't get a chance how busy work was, and then drove to my local gym to train. And by the end of the session at like 8:30 in the morning, I was ready to fall asleep. And you're thinking, is this really the most productive training session? That, if you had to fit that around a prep, I don't think any of my preps would have been as successful as they were if I had to juggle everything outside of the 12-hour work period.
And it makes it hard because before you start making money in bodybuilding, you need to have a couple successful preps behind you. So you have some pictures to show for it, right? Before you start making money through social media. I mean, it takes a while. So it sounds almost that prep is harder in the beginning than at the end because you have a little bit more luxurious life due to the financial backing that you then have. Because I remember coaching guys that are, not so financially secure, and their preps were way harder than the guys that had everything covered. And they could take breaks whenever they wanted and sleep whenever they wanted because it just takes all the stress away. That makes it pretty tough to really get your foot in the door, it seems. Because none of us have real jobs. I haven't had a real job in 15 years. Coaching and YouTube and website, you just manage your own time. And even though it's like 18 hours per day that you could potentially be working, you could also potentially take a nap when you want. And it's a big difference compared to showing up for a job for 8 hours straight. Because I used to do business consulting where you travel all over Holland with a car, to go various clients. And then you would get my workout in the morning before going to the office. And even that was exhausting, So can't imagine doing that on prep.
Yeah, I started in school, like I powerlifted in school, right? So my idea of like getting a job was always worked around powerlifting or bodybuilding. It was never the other way around. So I always like, well, what does that job look like? Will I be able to bodybuild? Which is probably a bad way to look at it, but it always allowed me enough space. Like even being in the hospital in a dietitian, we're a pretty cushy job in a hospital. Like we're an 8-hour shift during the day. There's no like, John, stat, we need like protein to, ICU patient. Like there's nothing like that. Like, breathing and heart beating come first, then nutrition. So it allowed me to bodybuild effectively and just like walk around the hospital and get steps in, which I wasn't even doing it at the time. And I think that's going back to our point of like having a successful prep that really opened my eyes. Was tracking your activity and steps was never even a thing when I was starting. So what I would do when I did start coaching, and moved away from my hospital job, I would just sit down all day, and I'd go to the gym and train. And when I actually started tracking my steps and stuff, like, man, I was getting like 3,000 to 4,000 steps a day. And I was wondering, like, man, I was doing 2 like 45-minute hard sessions of cardio, 1,500 calories by the end of prep. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, why is this so damn hard? And I was like, oh, duh. Like you're just moving less and less and less as you're like getting more taxed. So now like towards my preps, I don't even do cardio directly. It's all steps. I have like a walking pad. Mm-hmm. I can do like 15,000 steps a day while I work and spread it out. Yep. So rather than having big chunks of output at the time, which now that's a luxury for me, but if you're still working somewhere, I think right now we're in an awareness point that about work ergonomics and keeping your workers in productive positions. So standing desk guard thing, walking pads would be probably more acceptable. But either way, like I'm in a prep, I'm trying to create the easiest way I can create a deficit with the least burden, right? I don't want anything taking away from resistance training, and hard cardio sessions is kind of the opposite of what I want to be doing for the goal of bodybuilding. So if I can just have a high step count, that's like my primary, outside of nutrition, like my secondary way that I would be looking to create the deficit, and then have a baseline of cardio that's probably needed and maybe is going to be increasing for a lot of people. That's the reality. Some people are like, I'm doing 2 hours of cardio. Like, man, some people are going to have to do 2 hours of cardio. Like, yeah, that's a thing. Or get down to like 1,200, 1,000 calories for some females. Like that is the reality for some people. So
yeah, the funny thing is that 2 hours of cardio per day kills your NEAT because you just want to sit on your ass the rest of the day. Yeah. I used to do 2 hours of cardio too because I would do crash diets during the summer holiday when I was still in university. And because you have 6 weeks. That's it, right? The diet, and then school starts. I don't have time to diet. I want to be cognitively productive. And your idea of a diet is that you do a crash diet, so you know that you're going to be brain fogged. So you can't do that during school. So summer holiday comes around, and just every day, 2 hours, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, and the rest of the time you just sit at home staring at the wall because you're so tired. And meanwhile, you see your legs just literally disappear in front of your eyes. But if you do 20 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at maximum, and keep your steps up, I mean, that's what Dean also did for his last prep. It's a huge difference. And all you need to do is get some sort of application on your phone or one of those old school pedometers to keep track of your steps, and maybe walk in between sets when you're at the gym. I mean, that's a great way to get maybe another 2,000, 3,000 steps in over the day.
That's what I do it every. In the gym.
I do it also at the gym every time. I do a lap. At the gym, I do a set. I do a lap. I do a set also so nobody talks to me. So I can actually have a workout. So I don't have to answer drug questions. I just, where's Steve? Yeah, he's walking around somewhere. But that way you get a couple 100,000 more steps in and you burn a good amount of fat. And it might detract from your training intensity once you get really lean. So you notice that, or I wouldn't do it when I'm sub 8% body fat. But up until that point, as long as training intensity isn't diminished, then just walk around. If you're short on time, or get a couple cats and chase them around the house. Yeah, I do it the whole day. I have 7 cats. Every time they come over, I just chase them around and I get my steps in that way. Yeah, really?
Yeah. It sounds silly, but it is a thing, right? Like you eat 5 meals a day, right? You probably hit your microwave for 2 to 3 minutes. No, walk during this time.
I cook.
You could get 1,000 steps while you did that. Oh, you actually cook. So it's like, I can't walk away from my stove.
I've brought microwaved meals to my job for over a decade in school, so I'm done. So I take I work 2 hours. I take my little mini break. I play with the cats 30 minutes. And I cook, I eat, I play, and then I go back to work. And that's the whole day like that. And it works quite well. It keeps you lean if you really focus on it. And otherwise, you have to do the standing desk with the little treadmill. And those treadmills are cheap. You can buy them for $200 nowadays. Right? You have the crazy big white ones for $2,000. I think Chase has one. It's a beautiful thing in his home gym, Chase Aaron's. But then you look on them online and you get these $200 ones. They probably break after 6 months, but $400 per year, I think it's well worth it. It's cheaper than a cat.
Yeah.
Just change around.
A drug thing on prep, just so now everyone is eyes big, they're all tuned in. Drugs.
They're on after 50 minutes. We got to talk about drugs.
What, some people have given me like argument back because I say like I use the peak amount of like dosing in the off season versus in prep. Then prep, my dosing's lower. Now, I would say within the composition of that, there could be like harsher compounds present. But I think where we see, like with a lot of people in all these issues we're talking about with prep, is them having to get in suboptimal positions where the timeline's fast, they're pushing down on the gas, and training performance is dropping. So what goes in when you have nothing left option-wise to retain tissue is more drugs. And you more see Tren. More Tren, more Halo, right? Yeah. The Anadrol load is present, full bore. So it's now
16 weeks out.
The total drug load's high now in a prep, which I think a lot of this has just been passed down protocols of, I still see them like, hey, 8 weeks out, I'm thinking about adding in X, Y, Z. It's like, well, why? Well, I don't know. That's just what you add in at that time. And that's how I was taught. Like, hey, like 12 weeks in, Tren goes in. 6 weeks out, Winnie goes in. 3 weeks out, Halo goes in. Why? I don't know. That's just what I was told. At some point, like, that's just what happens. But I was like, well, how do you assess when these things should be going in? And I think we talked about this on our last podcast, I believe. But what do steroids do? And it's muscle retention, muscle growth. So how do we like assess that? It's like your best proxy is going to be training performance. Mm-hmm. So this should be your guide for dosing in a contest prep or even your off season for that matter. So what I realized a long time ago when I was doing 212 is like, we started a prep, me and Jansen, we had pretty high drug load. I was like recomping, like training performance is going sky high. I'm like, Matt, I don't think I'm going to make weight if we do this. He's like, yeah, you're probably right. He's like, let's cut your drugs in half. So we lowered the dose way down. Yeah. Training performance held. I made weight. So it was just about like, man, you can maintain tissue in a far less drug load. Yeah. And so that's how all my preps are situated now, to where I have peak dosing in the off season. It's probably like 75% the total milligram amount in a contest prep. And I think being able to not have to run as much drug as well when you're in positions where you could have sleep get compromised and all these aspects, or GI issues become more being a problem. And to Dean, you're like, yes, right. All the main immune system is all compromised in the GI tract. You start seeing more food sensitivities and tolerances forming in someone in prep towards the tail end. And so we're at tottling like more drug on top of this kind of brewing storm. You run into a lot of problems. So this is like what people give me so much shit on, like using less drug in a contest prep than the off season, which it is for more probably someone that is in a position where they can have the right timeline and manage fatigue. But I also don't think for someone earlier on that it's a rationale of like, or justification to use more drug just because this is the way I have to prep and it's going to be suboptimal.
I think it's also because you stay leaner in the off season, right? And your off season is really geared towards growth. Whereas a lot of guys, they have to play catch up during contest prep, where they have a 1 month mass phase. I test the Anadrol, and then I gotta get swole again. But they come from a point of TRT, right? You could do like an 8-week clean out phase to get your health parameters in check, ready for contest prep. But some guys would stay off for 6 months, and then they need to blow up a little bit to start their contest prep. Whereas I feel if your dosages stay a little bit more moderate, maybe a little bit higher in the off season to put the size on, and then you taper downwards, or you have different compounds that might be a little bit more anabolic milligram for milligram and potentiate more of a cosmetic interference. I think that's easier to kind of wave through your entire year than go hard in one end and then take a hard off time and then go hard again during prep. So it seems if you just slowly taper things up, whether that's the diet, training intensity, or the drugs, it seems to have a more pleasant experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, people still like to go pretty hard on either direction, which is sad. So John, during the off season, what would be the compound selection? We don't have to go into milligrams versus the contest prep. Like, is there a big difference, or
honestly, it hasn't differed that much anymore. I would say, like, as generality, like, you might have. I think in prep, if we were differentiate them, like, hey, you had like some test primo off-season growth hormone, that's a pretty good base. Then into prep, you probably see a bit more test mast or primo, and then the more harsh stuff would be like, hey, trenbolone's probably there for some, and then an oral steroid. So like the Tren oral steroid piece is where you're seeing like the more harsh compounds come in. And I don't mean like stacking all 4 oral steroids together or some combination, but usually there's like, one, maybe 2 even being present.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, this is the last couple of weeks before prep. Do you guys take the injectables out before stepping on stage, just to prevent any lumps and bumps and that kind of stuff? Or do you run it all the way through because your gear is such good quality that you don't get any lumps and bumps?
Yeah. Do you want me to start this?
Go. Kurt,
sure.
Whoever wants to go first?
Sure. I think this gets into peak week, right? And
yeah.
So with the injection side, we look at like, okay, during peak week, when should I be pulling certain drugs out to create the aesthetic look? And I think this is when we run the risk of creating a lot of variables you need to manipulate within peak week. So if you're like going into peak week, you're like, well, I'm holding water. Let's say, like, why are you holding water? Like, which avenue is this from? Is it from stress cortisol? Is it from some drug stack you're running? And so I want to try to create, going into peak week, as few variables as I need to manipulate and hold as many constants as I can for an easy assessment. So the PED side of the equation, I started assessing like 6 weeks out and changing stack design to make sure there's not the water influence once I finally get to peak week. All right. So 6 weeks out is when I'm already starting to play with this testosterone dose. I start testing AIs and seeing how estradiol might influence a look. I also start playing with growth hormone and make some reductions and seeing how that influences a look. So by the time I get to peak week, I already have a set amount of like this much testosterone, this much growth hormone, or none. Has this guy in a shape on Monday where I can nearly put him on stage. Not the other way where we have tests and growth hormone all in, and then we'll just use a diuretic to drop off the water, and oops, we still had fat to lose. So this way, I cut the water variable out because I have that adjusted, and then we can see the fat loss continue to trail out from there. But the injection side, now this is where this would come in, is like when to stop injections. Well, I have some guys, and those guys that are very full and round and likely don't get in great condition. Those guys are usually the ones that need just removal of growth hormone or some of the water-driven compounds, testosterone, primarily what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, guys like myself, they're the condition guys that get like granted, like, right? Like, man, when I drop testosterone and growth hormone, my look just flattens out. I don't look as hard. So I leave it in all the way through the show. But what you should start assessing, and so I say anything you do, assess it. Ask the whys. So after an injection, how long does it take typically for this issue to resolve, or is it a problem, right? It's like, man, I do a shot on my shoulder. It takes me like 5 days for it to feel normal. And then we probably want to add a couple days on just for like, just in case. So that's when you should stop your last injection and just assessing your own compound your response to these injections. But for a lot of guys, hey, if you're on like a longer ester, stopping it even like 5-7 days out is not going to really be a problem, right? Or even if it's like a Tren Ace you're running, by the time you're in peak week, food's going up, drugs can come down. Like that's the key of like muscle retention is probably more food driven than trenbolone driven. So as a general guide, a week out for stopping injections would be within reason. I usually go 3 days because I'm just familiar with the gear that I use and my response. So that's just the generalities of like starting to assess the look and make gear adjustments far out, and then tailoring that to the individual's need across the spectrum of how much someone needs in for fullness versus condition.
Yeah. Do you have guys that run their injections all the way into the show, or generally at least a couple days before the show where they take it out?
At least a couple days, because
Yeah.
man, everyone could have a bad shot gone wrong,
Right.
even though you've
That's
been
very
doing
risky.
fine. So it's just like, at least give yourself 3 days. Like, it's not gonna be a big deal if you just have a few less injections. I think people worry potentially if you're doing like shows back to back, and how do you manage that? It's like, well, if I need to cut my shots out 7 days out, then my next show's 7 days, then I have another one. Like, do I just not do any injections during that time? It's like, well, okay, this is a little different situation, and where you probably could leave some in or just restart them, do a few shots, then drop them back out a couple days before. And that's how I've done it for last shows. You bring a little bit back in, pull it back out a few days before. If you have really bad gear, man, solve that problem, right? So that's going to be a real issue for you if you're in a contest prep.
Yeah, you still see it happen though at the highest level, where guys walk on stage with giant lumps. And you're like, what the hell's going on? You're supposed to know a little bit better, but stuff can happen. Obviously, even at the highest level, and it's very distracting as the audience. You're like, that's not a muscle. That should not be there. Yeah, so I'd rather play it safe and tell people to cut it at least a couple days before.
Yeah, easily.
And then obviously, the manipulation of the testosterone and the growth hormone is kind of person dependent, because I also know people that keep the growth hormone in while simultaneously lowering their testosterone dose quite a bit, and then remaining a full look. But that comes with the experience, obviously. And that takes time. That takes multiple preps.
I think, you're welcome. I can throw the question out. It's like, there's a lot of confusion around fullness and water, and like, oh, I'm running this to stay full. And what does that mean for an aesthetic look in water compartments? Like using growth hormone, right, for fullness. And there's just a total body water storage, right? Which intracellular, extracellular, that's all space within a muscle. But also there's going to be space outside of the muscle, intracellular, extracellular. And I think a lot of terminology around we see in prep of intracellular meaning inside the muscle, and extracellular meaning outside the muscle, and that's not correct. So intracellular, extracellular is all intramuscular as well. And if you're very, very lean, you won't have much water outside the muscle, because all those cells are, fat cells are shrinking down, and there's basically only skin left. So, and there's not really a lot of water storage even within a fat cell, right? So if you're very lean, most of your water is just intramuscular. And so if you're using growth hormone and these other things, a lot of that influence is still water being held within a muscle, or even for glycogen, that matter, right? So if you're doing like vast water reductions, or you're going to be cutting growth hormone out, you are going to be reducing some of your volume, a lot of your volume within the muscle, but this is the idea of peak week of like, well, there's going to be a way where I can just lose subcutaneous water, not have any influence without intramuscular water. That's not how the body works. You cannot separate these compartments. There might be moments of shift where you look harder, but I would say it's probably for a different reason, outside of like you're influencing the different ratios and different compartments of the body. But I can keep going down here. I'm sure Dean is itching to touch on the physiology side, but even during the dehydration effect, water loss between intracellular and extracellular space is pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio. But again, it's all inside the muscle, intracellular and extracellular. So I think this is when, if you're going into peak week and you're expecting, using vast water reductions to create a hard look, that's going to be a problem when you're trying to also maintain a full look. It's like, well, this is a big error that I see in peak week, is that someone's going to get dry, then get full. And it's like, man, you need water to fill out and store glycogen. Even then, we have even that's touted as evidence-based, right? Of loading carbohydrate and then dry. So spill and then dry, right? But you have to say, like, is the glycogen water reserve? Because you store water with glycogen, correct? Is that glycogen water reserve separate from all the other water inside the muscle? And you see, like, even in the research, like the dehydration effect, you still see water loss within the total water volume of the muscle. So you can't just store glycogen, hold water, and then remove water all outside to what's not stored glycogen outside the muscle. So we just see a lot of like, there's a lot of bro science there that should be dispelled around peaking, that your vast shifts in peak week are easily going to leave you with a soft and flat look if you go too far to the extremes.
I call it the constipation protocol. But that's what happens, right? They try to do a dry load with a lot of carbohydrates. They already start to restrict fluid, and then most of that food just stays in the intestinal tract, and then you have this blurry mess. Like the whole body might be full and veiny from all the carbs and the sodium, but then you have this blurry mess around the abdomen because you're constipated, and then you're like, what happened to his abs when everything else is peaked? And in a lot of cases, that's constipation. When in reality, if you could just fill up first and then manipulate the water a little bit later on after you're already full, and then you just have to keep the fullness, of course, assuming that you have good body fat levels or that they're super low. Yeah, that seems to be a more favorable approach. Dean, what do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think what John has covered is excellent. And I think another thing that we need to discuss is there is no magical esters when it comes to peaking or for contest prep in general. So you get guys getting to 3 weeks out, and I'm now 3 weeks out, therefore I must swap to test probe instead of test enantate, or mast probe instead of mast enantate, which, you know, doesn't yield any difference other than the injection frequency, or the peak plasma level might vary slightly, but at that point you've probably been taking drugs that long that the ester makes marginal difference over your stable plasma levels. The other thing,
if
obviously,
anything,
like
you're
John,
injecting more oil because the concentration is lower.
And like John said, then when you're in peak week, if you do have to drop out your injectables, people tend to forget the total milligram load of the orals then that are still in play. So now someone's taken 100 milligrams of Winstrol daily leading up to the show. That's still 600, 700 milligrams of Winstrol that's gone in across the week. So it's still serving the purpose of maintaining the androgen-derived look of dryness that Winstrol can bring cosmetically. You're still supporting training performance because you're more than likely perhaps utilizing halo testing or Anavar even at that point as an ergogenic aid for training. So really dropping out your injectables, other than, like John touched on, your testosterone to estrogen ratio might change across the week. You're not really going to lose much muscle mass, but you might lose some level of fullness depending on more so the estradiol level, because that's going to influence the extracellular fluid compartment for fullness to speak. The other thing, like what you brought up there about constipation as well, is you always know when someone has a successful peak, if you want to call that, is if they wake up on contest day and they have a stool movement at the same time as they would have any other day of prep. They wake up and immediately, as soon as they've woken up, hydrated a little bit, and they've had a bowel movement, I've always said game on. If you wake up and you don't have a bowel movement, your priority that day of show day is to have a bowel movement to ensure, you know, that you don't have that distension on stage, or you don't have, I won't say toxins, but you're going to have water being pulled into the colon and to try and move some of that mass along. So that can take some water away from your muscles, which would then affect your fullness as well. And even, you know, in that case, you'll get guys on show day waking up constipated and then think, okay, I'm just going to stick a glycerol suppository up there to pull fluids from the body down to have that bowel movement, but then are afraid to drink water after having that bowel movement in order to replace some of that water that's been pulled into the colon. So, the main thing here, I think, is whatever level of fluid you're drinking during your contest prep, it stays the same on show day. If anything, the old dated protocols of water loading, where you're like 4 liters Monday, 6 liters Tuesday, or like in American terms of 1.5 gallons Monday, then 2 gallons Tuesday, 2.5 Wednesday. You're ramping up to like 8 liters of fluid the day before the show, and then for some magic reason, 10 o'clock Friday night before you go to bed, no more water until you get off stage the next day, which from a aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone perspective gains you a bit of traction. So you're manipulating antidiuretic hormone is going down, your aldosterone is changing, which is helping you to overshoot or over excrete a level of fluid from your body. But it's just an inappropriate way to mess with a variable like that when for the whole of your prep you've probably been drinking 4 to 5 liters of fluid depending on your body weight and your sodium, potassium, magnesium balance, with sodium loading, potassium loading, all these dangerous protocols that whatever you wake up, like if your show is Sunday, the previous Sunday at 1 week out, whatever you look like when you wake up that morning, it's pretty much how you're waking up a week later on stage. To be, brutally honest with someone, you might be a little bit fuller if you bump up calories to maintenance, some extra carbohydrates for a couple of days at the start of the week. You're dropping fatigue with cardio being removed. Leg training intensity is reduced. You're not changing anything magical between one Sunday to the next, really, overall. So you always gauge pretty much how you look a week out is what you're aiming for when you get on stage the next week. I mean, me personally, the last 2 seasons I've ate nothing on show day, whereas in the past I would have had foods. And for me, I found that keeping hydrated on show day, getting electrolytes in, having some essential amino acids with maybe 30 grams of cyclic dextrin mirror pretty much my intra-workout drink all throughout the morning leading to stage time. Again, I was replicating how I looked after a training session. I've had 1.5 liters of fluid. I've had X amount of carbohydrates, X amount of protein, sodium, potassium, etc. And you knew then exactly what that looked like after training. And you're just going to replicate that on show day with pumping up. It was simple as that without having to do any, magician hat tricks or anything like that where you're taking a big risk to maybe gain an extra 1 or 2% on your physique, which at that point, what you've talked about at the start, like some of the crazy protocols of insulin, glucagon, Anadrol, Superdrol, some of them can have their place.
Fun, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we done an experiment on the last prep for one of the shows. I'd always cut, just based on my physique's appearance, cut growth hormone 10 days before a show, knowing that it blurred some of my detail. And when it came out, it gave me, I wouldn't say as hard of a physique in terms of fullness, but I was more separated and dry. So the condition aspect was a lot better. And I found with doing that, when we took a chance and kept it in leading up to the other show, this show didn't have a weight cap for classic bodybuilding. It was just an open criteria. The physique was a lot more impressive in terms of like bubbliness and fullness, but the detail just wasn't the same as with it without. So like John said, you have to almost assess what the compounds are doing to your look and know your body in terms of like what's the best approach here for the judges' criteria. If the judges are going to favour condition and separation, well then it makes no sense to have compounds in play that are going to potentially blur or offset the detail.
That's hard though, picking shows based on what the judges want. But I know people in the US that do that. They go to particular shows where their look is favored by the judges. Because certain groups of judges like a fuller look, whereas other guys like a leaner look or a more conditioned look. And you just pick and choose your shows because most of the shows have, the same judges because they live in that area. Mm-hmm. To come back with what Dean was saying, I do notice that not eating on show day is less bad for your look than not drinking, which is weird because you would think that you'd go flat. But it's for most guys, I mean, unless you're really big and you have a crazy metabolism, most guys can actually stay quite full by not eating on show day. And that allows you to pull a vacuum and have this crazy tapered look. Whereas if you stop drinking, especially after the show, where your aldosterone and, lipids or your electrolytes are kind of off the scale, then you gain like 20 pounds of water because you didn't drink for a day. You cut it off at 10 and then didn't drink the entire day on contest prep. Then on Sunday, everything you drink and everything you eat, you retain. All the sodium, all the water, and then you're up 20 pounds 3 days later.
Well, muscle glycogen's a one way. You just magically lose muscle glycogen by sitting still. You have to contract the muscle for it to come out, and it doesn't go from one muscle. You don't pull glycogen out of one muscle to support another muscle or your blood sugar. It doesn't. So, assuming that you've peaked correctly, and they're not working out the day before the show, why would they all of a sudden flatten out?
Yeah, you basically
Right?
don't
That's
work
a
out for
fluid
3 or
issue.
4 days.
Like you said,
Yeah.
that's if you're dehydrated, you'll start to look like that. But that's not a food issue,
No.
right? Because you want their stomach tight generally. Outside of some, like, look at Samson's a great example. What does that guy eat before a show? Like 3 eggs and a cup of coffee,
Nothing.
and he's big as a house.
I think Derek doesn't really eat much either. I mean, his vacuum is super deep.
Yeah.
Right? And you can basically sleep all day until the show in the evening.
Yeah.
John, what do you eat on show day? Is it basic stuff or you don't eat? Because your vacuum is deep as well.
Yeah, I try to go as low volume as possible. So like protein's nearly pulled out. It's like maybe a little bit of rice, but I bring more fats in to make it more dense and hold the glycogen load that already occurred. So like if you're waking up on show day and you need a ton of food to load, you already messed up. Like should have already been loaded. Then on show day, it's nearly like a maintenance, right? Like you're also moving a lot less, like Kirk just said. So caloric amount could come way down. I like to bring in dried fruits. Like that's been my thing because they're like calorically dense as well. So I try to keep volume as small as possible and eating pretty close to maintenance. And so, yeah, there's not a lot that occurs. Great point, Steve, too. Water will go really far too. You can always it's a lot easier to, add water in, and that could ruin a look pretty quick. So I'm like pretty cautious on show day with water. This is exactly how I peak, like how Dean mentioned is every day at peak week is assessing like it's show day. And what I look for is like, if there's not a moment on peak week where you look like you could have walked on stage, you were probably never there to begin with. And you probably had more fat to lose, or you're doing some type of goofy like PD stack that should have been adjusted a long time ago. And so that's what I look for in peak week is every day trying to hold variables steady, assess, and how much carb do I need and how much fluid do I need to get my body weight and look, because it'll transition up from a fasted low body weight. You'll start moving up as you eat and drink fluids to get fuller and fuller and fuller. And at some point along the spectrum, you're going to have a nailed look you want to walk on stage with. For Dean, maybe that's post-training. I had 2 meals. I had this much fluid. I want to look like that on stage. Do that on show day. And that's exactly how I peak, like for the Olympia, which is a night show. So here's where fluid manipulation needs to happen. It's like for me, after like 2 meals and it was like about a gallon of fluid is where I have my best look. That's in the morning. What about nighttime? What if you compete at nighttime? So I eat and drink up to that look and that weight. From there, I maintain it by lowering water. I could even eat the same amount of food, but with water reduced, I can hold that look, and that's how I land in a stage. So even for prejudge, right? Like I get up to that look, I maintain it from prejudge all the way to finals, titrating fluid up and down. And that's how I manage fluids on show day. So there's not some big like water cut. And then, because if I'm already waking up dehydrated and flat, why would you cut water going into that? It's just more ground to have to make up. Same with all these other protocols, right? Like a glycogen depletion in the beginning of peak week or fat load in the beginning of peak week. Yes, I want to dig my hole deeper to just have to fill in more food later on, which is more GI stress, which is more variables to complicate things. And then I'm going to have to dry out and pull more water out. Another variable to skew more. It's like, keep it simple, become a master of just assessing just fluid and carbohydrate. That's all you need to be manipulating. Sodium, potassium, everything else can stay very consistent when you're not doing vast manipulations in all these other areas. So that is peaking exactly how I do it. Find the look, replicate it on show day. Put that on stage. You'll nail it more times than trying to do all these different protocols. And I've done them all. I've done water loads, tapers. I've done diuretics all peak week long. Most time that's always led to a flat look on stage.
Yeah.
I mean, even
so you basically just look at yourself and assess what you need to do for the next couple of hours and then proceed from there. Yeah.
That's it.
Easy. And it's so easy to say it. And so many guys, they completely mess up. What I think is important for all competitors is that they have their own posing room, which replicates light on stage. Because so many guys, they have the kitchen lighting or the front lighting or the side lighting or a posing room where there's only top lighting. And then they think they're in shape. And then they step on stage and they look 8 weeks out. And I'm like, didn't you see this yourself? Yeah, I look great in the gym. It's not gym lighting. You have the most horrible lighting on stage to make you look as flawed as possible. So it's up to you to get in gnarly conditioning so you actually look good in these stage lightings, because the light is literally coming from all around. There's no shadows to hide your fatness. So I think a lot of guys mistake that they're in shape because they don't have a posing room. I know, John, you have a posing room right at home?
I do have one. Yeah. And I also have where I take my pictures, standardized artificial light. So I don't have influence from like variance and assessment, right? But man, great point, Steve. Like, get in front of like natural light, daylight on you. You won't be able to hide in that. And that'll show like some true condition. Yeah. I think it's also important that you understand lighting changes and tanning changes in assessment. Because I've gone to shows, like when I did Toronto, I didn't have great light in my hotel room. I brought some artificial light. But man, throw a tan on someone, like you mentioned with Dream Tan, right? It fills in the gaps and like you don't look as hard. So you come back from your tan, you see your visuals, you're like, oh no, like, why am I so flat looking and not conditioned? It's like, you're the same. Just like, that's how the tan will skew you. But it's also a pretty quick realization of like how conditioned you need to be. But I do like bring like my own lighting setup to create some standardization, because I have a lot of guys that'll like in front of their window, right? But once they put their tan on, it's nighttime, then that has to change. And you're like, well, it's hard to really assess it. So I try to just create a replication of the environment and lighting, and understand like tan goes on, you're going to look softer. That's going to be natural. And you need to know that to find that in individuals of like where things you need to be looking at for condition to make sure you're not making the wrong calls as like a coach either.
Yeah. The tan needs to absorb in the skin. And that's why I never liked tan on the day of the competition. Like the spray tan on the day of the competition, I was so against it because for a lot of guys, it makes them look soft and watery. So I'd rather have them apply like the base coat like 4 days starting, or actually do real tanning. Nowadays, nobody wants to do that anymore, but just go tanning for real, or go out in the sun or a tanning salon, use some Lantan too if you need to. Get that base tan that's legitimate, and then you apply a top coat at least 2 days before the show and let that all absorb. Does it mean that you're not going to shower? Okay, nobody can smell you on stage. It's not the end of the world. But at least that film of water is gone. And I see so many guys fail. They get into the spray booth, and 2 hours later they're on stage and they still have that water on them, or some skin irritation from the alcohol. And it ruins the look. And sometimes you see that with shows where the lighting is good and then all the athletes look terrible. It's because of the tan.
I've ruined this so many times, Steve, and I'm a guy that just doesn't get tan with whatever with the coating. So I've had coats and coats and coats until you get like this muddy look, and it just distorts your look. So what Renee and I do now is like we just take Pro-Tan with us. She hand paints me on. The night before, I rinse the next day, and so every night I'm getting like stained and stained and stained, and then on show day, I still rinse again, my last base coat. I go to the tanner, they spray on a final, their bronzer. So it's one coat, one light coat, and that's it. That's it. Before, it'd be like 3 coats on top, and you're sleeping in it, and it's all cakey. And so this is finally where I have like this nice, deep, dark bronze tan that isn't all caked on.
Yeah, well, my wife was still competing. We do something similar. So we do a morning coat and an evening coat and then shower. And the next day again. And the last day would use that Pro-Tan top coat, the mousse stuff, and then not shower on the day of the show. So it's only one day that you don't shower, only one coat that you didn't shower. And then her, compared to everybody else, was using Dream Tan and not in her conditioning. It was night and day. It was night and day, the difference, compared to all the other competitors. Now, the World Championships is not such a high level as the Mr. Olympia bikini class. But my wife looked like a bikini competitor at the Mr. Olympia level, just simply because her tan was 10 times better than all the other competitors. I think it makes such a huge difference. And you can literally set up the light by, you get those LED strips that are rolling. You just tape them all around the edge of the wall, and you get one of these foldable backdrops that are made of the fabric of tents. You know, when you go camping, it folds into a little package. So you literally have a package that's maybe 2 pounds maximum. You can bring that anywhere and set up some sort of posing room in your hotel room. And then all you need to do is put the tripod there with the LED lights behind it. And it's always the same. The LED lights have from the top, the side, the bottom, which is basically the same as on stage. And if you get, a good voltage or wattage, you get them pretty bright, and then you could literally see everything. But the key is that you need to be in shape, because so many guys that think they're in shape and they step on stage and it looks like glaze. I'm like, fuck, man. Didn't you see that? Well, there's no filters on stage. So that doesn't help any either.
That was always why I took my pictures out in the back garden, like John said.
Yeah.
We're morning, like sunlight, like just low daylight. You can't hide what daylight is showing on your physique. So you have to be so critical. And like when we looked at my pictures, you're like, if there had been like shadows, my lower back would have looked in. But with the daylight, you could see those last, 1 or 2 pounds that we got off in the end. But for guys that are manipulating lighting to make their check-in photos look more favorable, they're only being delusional. So daylight is so harsh as a critic, but it'll keep you humble, because then you'll know exactly how you look in like the worst lighting. Because if you look amazing in the worst lighting possible, when you go on stage, your physique is just going to be so much better from all the detailing that the shadow brings out.
Yeah. I think most guys are in true condition when they look leaner in the evening, even after all that food and water, than they do in the morning. And most guys will never reach that point. That's why all these funky protocols are there. Because in the evening they look watery, and they're like, oh shit, I need a diuretic, otherwise I'm not going to be lean the next day. But actually, if you're leaner in the evening, then you're in true condition. And you don't even need a mirror or fancy lighting to assist that. You could literally feel it on your lower back and chest and glutes, where you just feel it. And like, oh, it's thinner than this morning. But then it's paper thin. It's like this thin. But most guys don't get to that point. And I wish it was on my glutes like this, but it's not. I wish.
Even like the discussion of being flat on show day, people assume that, flatness on show day is a food problem. And most often it's a hydration issue, whether it's, sodium or water or both, or you might require a small bit of fat in the instance of what John done in order to try and slow down metabolism or just keep you feeling satiated. But when you start adding diuretics into the mix either the night before, the morning of, or like some crazy coaches 4 days before the show, let's just keep taking a diazide every 8 hours till show day. Unless you truly understand what happens from a physiological basis from your electrolytes when you introduce, even if it's a potassium sparing diuretic like diazides, more than likely you're going to wake up on show day flat from dehydration, not from food. So when you wake up and you take your pictures and all of a sudden you can't feel your muscles contract in terms like your chest, your delts, your biceps, or there's just not that pop to the physique. First instance, like what we talked about, is like the blueberry pancakes and insulin. Let's go load up in the buffet because I'm clearly flat. And it's like, no, in this instance, you probably need about a litre of fluid, wait an hour and see what happens to the physique.
Yeah, and that's some salt packing.
That's it. And this is sort of a great thing that Justin Harris spoke about years ago, was using a glucometer on like show day. When you wake up in the morning, check your fasting blood glucose. When you wake up on show day, if your fasting blood glucose is elevated, above 100 or 5.5 UK terms, more than likely you're dehydrated and you need some water and maybe a little bit of sodium in order to push that glucose out of the bloodstream into your cells. And it gives you an insight into a crude insight into your hydration.
It's funny how people misconstrued that back in the day. And I did as well, but people started using the glucometer to see when they would be full. Because my glucose is now coming up to 130. I'm full now. I can stop. Yeah. But I actually had to do with hydration. Yep. Poor guy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
funny. You
and
see
it
that
was-
like spongy look.
Yeah,
It-
that
it
happens
was
a lot.
it was a great, great piece of advice to assess how dehydrated you were. If your blood glucose is elevated, especially if you were someone who carb loaded the night before the show, which again is not something that you'd want to really do. More like you wake up the next morning, you're dehydrated. If your blood glucose is elevated, you probably didn't take in enough water and sodium to help that glucose transport. So your first instance on show day is to try and get rid of that glucose out of your bloodstream and address the dehydration rather than adding more food in, which is the first thought. And it goes back to, on show day, you probably need minimal foods, but you need to pay attention to hydration, or, water or electrolytes or both.
Yeah, no constipation protocols. It's not the 90s anymore. Please.
That's
See,
the
too-
when you finally drink water again after the show, and you like get back home after your meal, and you're like, holy shit, like I'm exploding. Like I wish I did this on show day. It's like, oh, and then you think back, what did I just eat? Oh yeah, I ate that burger post show. It's like, no, man, you also drink a bunch of fluid. That was the point of it.
I remember one year competing. I've done the silly thing. We've all made our mistakes. This is how we're able to, speak from experience, where you cut show day fluids to as minimal as possible. And this year, the Irish National Championships went on to like midnight. It was the first year they introduced bikini into the Irish competitive schedule. And it was like hundreds of bikini girls. And our finals for men's bodybuilding in the under 80 kilo class, so what's middleweight, I think. We didn't get on stage till like 11:45 at night for our finals. And I kept thinking, right, no water. Like you need to be dry, and you keep going until you get on stage. And I remember getting off stage, and my dad was one of the judges. So he was judging the show. When we were leaving to go back to the hotel, I started to drink, and all of a sudden I started to actually throw up. I could feel the water just sloshing around in my stomach because I'd gone past the point of, dehydration, where my body was like, what are you doing now, putting all this fluid into me in one go, rather than, slowly titrating the fluid back in after not having it for so long.
Scary.
Yeah, and it's
Scary. Last thing I
and
want to address. Yeah. Last thing I want to address is posing. It seems that a lot of people don't practice their posing. And then even if they're not dehydrated and fully, perfect electrolyte balance, they're still shaking like crazy. Now, John was not shaking at all, and Dean wasn't either on his shows. So how often do you pose? And what would you recommend for clients in general? Because I would tell people just to pose 3-4 times per day and do like 3 rounds at least.
Can I just say Sam Sulik at the Arnold was super impressive with his posing. He held all those poses flawlessly forever. When everyone else next to him was shaking, it was super impressive, especially from where he came from the previous show, where his posing was 100% on. But it makes a massive difference in your presentation.
Yeah, because he had a problem flexing his legs, and then he kind of fixed that. That's still not 100%, but on the second show, going pro.
Yeah, no, you look great.
You look great, so it's good. But yeah, I still see that problem with a lot of people that don't practice their posing, and then they get on stage and it's just a shake fest. So John, how much time do you spend in your posing room before in the contest?
Yeah, well, this has tapered down over time, of course, like with experience. But my general guideline is, of course, posing is a skill and an art to present, but also a skill of having to be able to withstand the rounds. One of my friends, Daniel Coffeen, he made it's a videoless recording of Steve Weinberger doing call outs. And so I was like, this is genius. It's like you can play this recording and just listen to Steve do call outs, and Steve will hold you, right? So it's like, all right, if you can do 3 rounds with Steve doing the call outs, you're going to survive on stage. Which what I want to be able to do is every morning I'll just do 10 minutes straight posing, like I'm on stage. So this is going through quarter towns, through mandatories, which ends up being right around 3 to 4 rounds nonstop.
Yeah.
Transitions, everything nailed, perfect. If you can do that, you'll survive on stage. But I think you should be doing that at least twice per day running into peak week and having that tapering up across your prep. So even when you start in prep, you should already having posing taking place, and that factored in to your output for the day. Because I see this also becomes an issue later on in prep. It's like you're racing your prep now. There's more cardio, you need more posing, or posing just doesn't even happen. So what I like to do is like now posing's coming in more, that output side can decrease some. And the last thing that I want to leave with too is in peak week, you should be tapering your posing down. I've had clients call me like, oh, my posing coach has come by. We're going to run through a 30-minute session. Like a 30-minute posing session, like one day out, like what the hell you're going to figure out right now? It's like, you should have your posing done, you know?
Yes.
So on one day out, like you take your picks and that's it. Like you don't do rounds of posing. So on during peak week, like, man, posing's way tapered down. It's just basically for check-in picks because I already know what to do. So, you know, leading up with a peak that you should get up to, if you can do 3 10-minute rounds, like throughout the day, right? Like morning, maybe post-training, maybe in the evening, and lead that into your peak week, like you should be in really good shape to be able to pose on stage correctly.
Yeah, it's 30 minutes in total, and that's more than you'll get on stage. So that's
Yeah,
ultimately
don't go
really,
longer.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
these 30-minute, 1-hour posing sessions, to me, that's ridiculous. I also think it's ridiculous when you have a posing coach for an hour and he's like critiquing every single pose with all these different cues. Like, man, to retain information on prep, like you're posing with the coach could be like 15 minutes. Give some cues. There's your homework. Go learn it. Come back. Here's a couple cues for pose.
Yeah.
Go learn.
Mhm.
An hour session of critiquing someone pose, like get a new posing coach. Like that stuff just drives me off the wall. It's my pet peeve. that
Hey, you're putting a lot of people out of business now. What the fuck?
and posing during training. Fuck, I hate it. Like fully clothed and they're like posing in the gym. Like, what are you looking at right now? I'm squeezing the detail. Like, no, fucking wasting energy.
Shots fired. But it's okay. That coach is retired now.
So anyway,
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's yeah. Posing is severely underdone or overdone.
Yeah.
From what I see.
yeah. Breathing is extremely important, obviously, and having a breathing strategy while you're on stage. A lot of people don't consider that, and I've always been super conscientious of my waist, and because you're looked at every single moment, so understanding when you should be breathing, pacing yourself on stage, to where you can replicate like during your training, your posing, you do that exact same thing on stage. So we're doing a caught, doing like, you know, deep breathing with your waist and moving your diaphragm too much. So like just controlling your breathing, be able to pace out and learning that piece of it is huge and takes practice because you can't just white knuckle your posing the whole time. You will gas out, especially if you're nervous, you're hyped up, you start hitting your poses harder, you start doing the things you wouldn't do during your posing practice. And all of a sudden, that's when you see the guy now huffing and puffing on stage, shaking during posing, because you're now doing things that you should not be doing. So, you know, understanding how to breathe, like, hey, I have to blow all my air out for a vacuum and hold it. What do I do if I'm running out of air? Like, what do you transition? How do you regain your breath? These are all things that you need to learn and master. So when you get to show day, it's like, it's cakewalk.
Yeah. Yeah. I do believe there's one compound that I would like to recommend for guys that do a lot of posing is myo-inositol tripyrophosphate. That increases the hemoglobin oxygen affinity and just has better oxygen delivery. So instead of increasing your red blood cell count in hematocrit and then being slightly dehydrated, so your blood volume increases, you just improve the function of your red blood cells with ITPP that you can buy it online. And that actually makes a huge difference regarding your stamina and breathing capacity. So for all the guys that are trending up until the show, ITPP is something that you can look into. It makes quite a difference. Yeah, it makes quite a difference. So you can literally, because I notice it myself when I take it, my posing is 10 times better. Because I like to pull vacuums as well and do all these crazy poses. And it makes the breathing so much easier. So that's something people can look into. Before we don't discuss drugs at all, I have to give them a little bit of a PED education.
I think
I
was going to say what John said, even with posing coaches, 2022 was the first time I hired a posing coach. For all the other years, you were sort of not self-taught, but you you picked up as you went along. You learned from other people that would show you in the gym or whatever like that. But hiring an actual professional coach, man, like John said, I do a 30-minute session with one of UK's top posing coaches, Emma Hyman. She used to put me through my paces in that 30-minute session. I started in the off season before that 2022 prep. By the end of it, the sweat was dripping down me from being, made hold poses that you thought you knew how to pose. And now you've got a professional coming in actually tweaking little things, not allowing you to step off the gas in terms of like from your ankle all the way to the top of your trap is being completely contracted in a back double bicep. Like not taken for granted that you can ease off when you're in these poses. And like John said as well, your breathing, being able to learn how to breathe through your nose so that you can control your waist, moving from a transition from your side relaxed to your rear relaxed, not letting go of that diaphragm so your belly's protruding out as you're turning around, because the judges are watching as you're turning around for that one little slip up of breathing out at your belly button and having an expanded waist. Little things like that. I guess, like John said, as I got older, pose and practice became like less and less to speak. You could still do 2 or 3 rounds during prep, but it wasn't as much as in the past. Like 2022, I think I was doing 3 rounds in the morning, 3 in the like mid-afternoon, and then another 2 in the evening time, just to practice what was being taught by the coach. And then you sort of remember, you when you do these sort of lessons online, you've got the recordings to go back over to sort of learn your own body's cues. And it's more so, like John said, you have to more so remember the little cues, like in a back double bicep, chest up, lean back, chin up. Silly little things like that can make a huge difference to how your physique looks in a pose. Rounding your back, arching back, where do you need to tilt back too much or too little? Where are the judges sitting relative to you on stage? Are they sitting right below you? Are they sitting level in line with you? There's all these little things they have to take into consideration when you're doing shows of how you're going to angle your posing.
And then you need a hype man to scream at you when you're on stage, because the lighting is different than you expected. And they have a lot of top lighting, so there's a lot of shadows. Lean back. No, not too far back. They can't see the detail because there's shadows.
You're like, damn you, Steve.
Oh, my God, dude. No, so I used to do this for all of my clients at the World Championships because the lighting was different every time. And sometimes it would change day to day. And I would just stand there screaming on top of my lungs, lean back, lean forward, sit on that hamstrings. Oh, my God, dude.
Even
the worst.
Taking the time, and again, this is going to show day, taking the time to actually sit in the audience before you have to go backstage, to look at the lighting, to sort of know in your head, okay, this is the depth of the lighting relative to the judges. Where is the best position? Do I need to go right up to the line? Do I need to stay one slight foot back from the line? Even though they're calling you to the white line, you might think when you're watching guys transition, the white line isn't exactly the best position. A little slightly bit back from it is where you're going to get the best detail. And it's paying attention, like you said, to how the show has been set up, because that lighting, regardless like what you're posing, if you're in the wrong position, you're at the very end of the lineup, you might get a different look to someone in the middle as well. So you have to manipulate your posing then to match where the lighting is positioned on the stage.
Yeah, most shows are not lit properly, unfortunately. Like the Mr. Olympia, Arnold Classic, good lighting. And even the Mr. Olympia, they changed it day to day last year.
The Olympia wasn't great.
The first day was, second day was way better. And I actually mentioned that to Dan Solomon at the VIP meeting, said there might need to make some changes to this lighting. Anyway, they listened on the second day. But if you're still in the amateur ranks or maybe not high tier professional shows, then the lighting might be make it or break it. Same as same day tanning. You see all these guys that walk out the windows, nobody look good. It's not the competitor's fault. It's the tanning and the lighting that is not good. It's just unfavorable that day. I've seen it many shows happen, which is a shame. Because like at the Arnold Classic this year, everybody looked great. Literally everybody, from the first place to the last place. And that's what you would like to see from an audience perspective, but also from a competitor, obviously, because then everybody gets highlighted properly. And all this hard work is now immortalized in pictures. And when you see the pictures now in the videos on Instagram, you actually have like some bragging lights like, yes, I did look this fucking good. Whereas your look could be ruined by bad lighting. And that's out of your hands. You could do everything right, but if you have bad lighting in the show, then it's job done.
From a promoter standpoint, it makes bodybuilders want to do your show. Like I would pick a show because what are you really left with after bodybuilding? It's like just your photos, right? It's like I did shows this past year where I knew the lighting wasn't going to be great, but I just needed to do it. But man, like people like, oh, you looked off. I was like, I wasn't fucking off, man. It was just like, that's the lighting setup, right? And so when you nail it on your stage lighting, like bodybuilders want to come to your show. So from a promoter standpoint, it's extremely smart to try to nail and have the right lighting, the right backdrop. One
usually
thing
the lighting is usually the lighting is provided by the venue, but the venue doesn't understand bodybuilding.
Yeah,
and
sometimes it's standard, right? Sometimes they bring their lighting in. But you're right, it varies. So
it's a shame. It's a shame. But the bigger shows are usually properly lit, and then with the Olympia changing venues all the time, also. And then this year they had the graphics in the background. I'm like, man, this is.
I know.
Might not end well. At least the second night, everybody looked phenomenal. So they made some changes.
My second show I did, there was the Texas State. At the time, this was like the biggest Texas show, right? Like you had national level guys coming back through. It's when I finally saw someone in condition. I was like, oh, wow, I definitely am not in shape.
Oh, so that's what it is.
But anyway, what they did is like you're in this back holding room. Then they had a warm-up room you moved to. Then they'd move you to this other room where they had everyone standing in line to then go on stage. So the experts are back there like, blaze up, it's your time, like pump up. So you're pumping up, you're getting ready. They're like, all right, let's go from the warm-up room into the next room. You're like, okay, here we go. And then I realized like, oh shit, I'm like fourth in the line to then go out and your pump's fading away. And you're like, oh, there it goes, all this. And so one thing I learned from that is that if there's a live stream, because in some venues you could be like down in the basement of an auditorium. I watch the live stream, so I kind of have an awareness of what's going on. I also won't just sit where I'm told to be, stay. I'll go out to the show or like back to the curtain to see like where are they truly at. So when the experts are saying time to glaze up, these guys don't care about your timing. They just want to make sure everyone is getting on stage and they're running you through. So be extremely aware of your surroundings and where they're truly at on stage. This is also why, like on one day out, I don't train, but I do a practice pump up.
Okay,
it's short, it's like takes me like 10 minutes it's around the time when I kind of know my best look is going to happen. And so this practice is so I know exactly what to do backstage. So there's no guesswork, right? It's not like, get backstage, like, how do I pump up? Like, I don't know, like do some curls or it's like, we should already know this stuff, right? So I practice one day out to do the exact same thing when I do backstage, but I know the timing as well is a thing. So I know like, man, this only lasts me for like maybe 10 minutes. So wait till I'm in line and I see I'm about to literally walk out. And in line, I'm doing kind of this pump up. Or for a lot of guys, man, like for some pro shows, like we're going to go out there for like an hour. You think you're going to pump up and hold it for the whole time? Like kind of not realistic. It's almost like just go out there, look ready. And as you're posing, you're going to get pumped up and make sure you can just make the rounds. Yeah. So pumping up can be a little bit overrated for a lot of these divisions. And you're like, oh man, I wasn't full. I didn't have time to pump up. It's like, man, pumping up usually isn't saving anyone going out there. So
you can do some isometrics when you're standing in line. That's what I told most of my clients. Like if you're perfectly peaked or close to perfectly peaked, all you need to do is just do some fake laterals, flexing against your own muscles, maybe a little bit of pump up, and then you're good. And with women, it's even worse because they stand in their high heels for hours.
Yeah.
I'd never let my wife did that. When she was competing, she would stand in her high heels for 20 minutes maximum. She would, just carry him around. Yeah, and then you line up, you put the oil real quick, she'd pump up, which is also great because she was in good shape. And then all the girls in the lineup would be demoralized because they'd see like, oh, fuck, she's really good. And
would y'all wear slippers as well?
Yeah. Just the whole shebang.
Backstage, just sometimes you're on like hard, cold concrete. You start getting cold. So man, I stay in my socks and like sandals till I'm like about to like walk on, just kick those off, then I like go on stage.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. Okay, I think we're pretty much at the end now. Any parting words for contest speaking and what people can do to look phenomenal besides just getting fucking shape for a change?
Yeah. Don't get fat in the off season.
Kurt, anything you want to parting words?
Yeah, just stay in shape all year round. Makes it much easier.
Yeah. Dean?
Yeah, give yourself enough time, like what we discussed at the very start. Minimum, I'd always say 20 weeks. Maximum, there is no real maximum, depending on how fat you are. But really, if you're going to compete, 20 weeks is pretty much a minimum. You'd rather be ready early and then be able to increase food than be chasing your tail and then do all sorts of crazy crap that we've discussed over the course of the podcast.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I wish unicorns existed. At least maybe they do. We just haven't found them yet. But at least for peak week, they're not there. So there's no magic tricks just yet to bring in a physique that was never conditioned to begin with. So be consistent in your variables and master just assessing the look. Find your best look in peak week and just replicate that on show day. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be the better call than looking for a magical protocol.
Yeah. I would say that people compete way too early, and you should only step on stage when you're truly ready. And that means doing all the work, doing all the posing, doing all the tan. So then when you do walk out, you look like a professional, even if it's your first show. I mean, look at Sam Sulek. He looked almost like a professional when he walked out and he got his pro card on his second show after feedback once. Right? He was training for a very long time, dieted his ass off, practiced the posing to the best of his abilities, showed up, took the adjustments, and won a show. If you can't do that, just stay in the audience. I know I can't do it, so I stayed in the audience. And I wish a lot of people would do that because these shows are way too long with very subpar physiques. And it takes away from the good physiques because they stay there 4 hours longer than they need to be. So we all start somewhere, but I think you can step on stage pretty damn close to where you should be if you just give yourself a little bit more time and practice a little bit harder. And yeah, that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort. I'll put all your social media links down below so people know where to find you. John, when is your next show?
I'm going to be competing in August and September. So Texas Pro, and then I'm going to go to Europe and do Italy and Germany.
Oh, okay.
And if I still don't qualify, I'll hang out and do France as well. So,
oh yeah, might as well, right?
Yeah.
Dean, when is your next show?
I am happily retired for this year.
We've heard this before.
Don't tell my wife.
Don't tell your wife, right? Yeah. Kurt, you're retired also, right?
I'm retired.
Yeah, I never got started because I know better. I know my physique, and it's not. No, honestly, it's not worthy for a stage. People say that I should compete, but there are too many gaps, and it takes too much work to become stage worthy. And I just don't want to spend that time. I think I'm better off making YouTube videos.
It doesn't have to be the fitness outlet for everyone, right? Like everyone just
no.
I mean, compete. Like there's plenty of other ways to like expand your fitness journey than get on stage.
Yep.
I met Jay Cutler in 2006, and I shook his hand after he won the Mr. Olympia. That was when he did the Dutch Grand Prix. I shook his hand at one of the seminars, and all my aspirations to compete fell to the floor. Because we only had bodybuilding at the time, and I was still natural. And I shook his hand, and I'm like, how am I ever going to look like this? So I that's when I threw in the towel, literally. It's like I cannot. Now I'm maybe at classic, but at open, no way. So I'll leave it there. John, you're welcome to come back anytime. It's always insightful to talk to you. Kurt, Dean, I'll see you next month. I have no idea what the topics are going to be, but I'll shake something out of my my pockets, and then we'll decide on a little bit more drug talk because I don't know how the audience is like. No drugs, no views, man. So we'll see you guys next month. John, take it easy. I'll come on your podcast soon, and then
sounds great.
We'll discuss something interesting as well. All right, guys, peace out. See you next time.